On today's episode, we shall discuss healing. And when I say healing, I of course mean spiritual healing. And as everything is spiritual, everything is spirit, it seems a bit redundant. This is the Almost Daily ZenCast. Hello, and namaste. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I am your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo. Let's get started. Welcome. Thank you for tuning in. My deepest gratitude for your support and engagement. I am your humble host, the incorrigible Mr. Zeppo, and today I want to talk about healing. First things first. Disclaimer. I am not, and never have I, claimed to be anything other than what I am. I am not trying to market myself as a healer. Conversely, quite contrarily to that, as awkward as that phrasing was, in the contrary, I am of the philosophical position that every human being is innately capable of healing. And it is the tragedy of our postmodern circumstances that we have, for various reasons and multiple causes, allowed ourselves collectively, broadly speaking, as a species, to forget that we have that capacity, to neglect that we have that responsibility, and to ignore that healing is the cosmic calling, right? There's plenty of ways one could debate and analyze the unfathomable question about the meaning of life. Many a theory has been proposed. Many theories have been proposed. Some of these theories have become dogma, which renders it kind of useless, in my opinion. And I personally am left with a lot of questions, right? And that's what this show's about, is asking big questions about wild ideas. Healing is this mysterious subject that we simultaneously pay a lot of lip service to and also seem to neglect and take for granted. For example, self-care is trending right now, right? It's already gone beyond becoming an over-memed trope. You can find 20, 30, 40 different versions of the same basic notion that self-care is important. And I'm not judging that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's great to see so many diverse expressions and so many nuanced and otherwise very similar expressions of that idea, because it's important to remind ourselves in the midst of all the rat race and chaos in the world, that self-care is important, that we need to attend to our needs. Despite that, though, how often do we really commit to the challenging process, the admittedly difficult and painful process of looking inward and attending to our spiritual trauma. Bubble baths with wine are great. I'm not panning them. But do they, on their own, attend to this deep-seated need to address both a collective spiritual trauma that is carried forward every generation across the species, because we're all interconnected in a spiritual way that we don't really have great language to describe just yet. At least I'm not aware of it. Plenty of people are describing these spiritual phenomena in their own way, but there isn't a commonly accepted, normalized, scientific description of it. Not to overglorify science, put a pin on that up on the corkboard. Plenty has been said in the podcast about science and its problematic issues. But I am not a science denier. I also refuse to limit my worldview to some strict materialist view. Not to say that all scientists are strict materialists, but for quite some time there, that was the default operational worldview if one were committed to a scientific understanding of the world. Of course, science has transcended its own conceptual limits in ways that, aren't hitting the mainstream yet, I think. And more of that will be coming down the pipe as the sciences converge in such complex areas as holographic, fractal, sacred geometry, and, the root origin of consciousness, etc. Life is a chaotic mystery. And one of the problematic issues there, I think that I observe in the world, that I have experienced in my own life, is that it is such a chaotic mystery that we get overwhelmed by the chaos and the mysterious things that aren't awe-inspiring, but rather terrifying. Because mystery can be either or a little bit of both. And in that chaos, in that being overwhelmed by the chaos, all the horrible things that we see in the world, and trying to balance that with our appreciation for all the beautiful things in the world, it's not surprising that we tend to overlook, both at a collective level and at an individual level, this deep need to attend to the wounded aspects of our inner life, of our inner experience. I'm not the first to talk about it. Obviously, plenty of people out there preaching some modality or some practice or some regimen or some recipe for spiritual healing. But that begs the question of, and there's so many questions we could tackle here in this kind of episode. That begs the question, why have we commercialized it so much? And I get that part of the answer to that is that even the most spiritual individual is still bound by these postmodern socioeconomic obstacles and restrictions. Even back in the day, even back in Buddha's day, he is attributed to saying something along the lines of, before awakening, chop wood, carry water. After awakening, chop wood, carry water. And I recently saw a delightfully paraphrased postmodern version of that. Before enlightenment, pay electric bill, buy groceries. After enlightenment, pay electric bill, buy groceries. We could put a pin in that because we could just spend a whole day talking about that in and of itself. My point in bringing it up here is that, like, even if we are experiencing epiphanies and connecting dots and making realizations and engaging with our spiritual journey in deeper, higher frequency ways, all that to say is, if we're experiencing any of these phenomena that are the signposts along the path towards enlightenment, we can get caught up in that, and there's plenty of ego traps laid along that path. Any path, your path, my path, they're all infinitely unique and also simultaneously, converging on oneness. Ego knows the spiritual path better than we do. In part because ego, the individual part of our ego, is deeply connected to the species-wide architectural back end of ego, as it were, the engine that drives the individual expression of our egos. And if we think of that as a system, not to mechanize it or digitize it, but if we think of that as a system, a living, breathing system in and of itself that's integral to our being, instead of an externalized, vilified, objectified, or personified, because sometimes we kind of try to do both, right? We make it a universal power and call it evil, but then we also embody it in a mythic figure or in individuals. The more we get caught up in that, the less we are capable to bring our awareness deep within to address our ego's trauma. Now, zooming back and transitioning here, because I want to stay on my little show schedule that I made up 2 years ago and yet to nail. We live in a world where we are saturated with messaging, right? And ego jumps on that. We've created a postmodern context where we value the surface features or aspects of well-being, but we don't really honor the process or the processes, the various procedures that help us cultivate that wellness. And we stigmatize and marginalize those who struggle with their lack of wellness or their journey towards wellness. And we have allowed, and I never mean to pin the blame on any individual. I'm not accusing you, dear listener, of anything in any of my statements. So remember that as a disclaimer throughout the podcast show. And rarely, except for public figures, am I trying to pin anything on any individual. Broadly speaking, we've created a set of conditions for ourselves as a species where we're focused on so many things. We have such a plethora of things to focus on. Good, bad, mediocre, indifferent, irrelevant, and everything in between. That it's really difficult to focus not on ourselves, but on the mysteries of our inner world. it's really hard for us to do that especially without flirting with dangerous ego traps. There's a huge difference between being selfish and being self-focused or self-aware, right? But we blur those lines like crazy. And we, collectively speaking, over decades, over generations, we've created a culture that doesn't leave a lot of room, doesn't offer a lot of guidance, doesn't encourage very much exploration of the mysteries we can find within ourselves. And it's easy to dismiss with just a cursory glance. Trust me, I know, I've done it, right? I've tried to wear all the hats in my life and often approach new ideas with a skepticism that's bordering on cynicism. And I remember it, in a different time in my life, being intrigued by esoteric, mystical ideas, but being quite averse to even contemplate what it would mean to experience anything other than the darkness of the back of my eyelids. Because of this lack of guidance and cultural wisdom that we've lost, right? It's not like healing or awareness of the internal mysteries is anything new. Repackaging and commodifying it and selling it back to ourselves, that's kind of new, although not really. The Catholic Church started doing that as soon as they were a global entity. Not to drag that whole set of histrionic argumentation into this discussion. And we've been taught, but it does relate here. We've been taught through religion, probably heavily and unfortunately influenced by the course of events and the ways in which interpreting the original texts changed and or was altered over time by the Catholic Church when it was a monolith of all things organized religion in most of the Western world, particularly, and healing was taken away from us. Jesus literally said, "All that which I can do, you can do also." And somewhere between the first capturing of those words, and we can, there's plenty of debate about that. Put a pin up on the board. But somewhere between whenever those words were first preserved by those who were following and or trying to learn from those that learned from this person that we mean when we say Jesus, to, at some point when suddenly the Catholic Church dominated the entire Western world, healing was that, although that phrase was never struck from the text, it's still there. Open the Bible. Everything I can do, you can do, or something to that effect, depending on translation, depending on editions, etc. But the actual practical, actionable wisdom of that was taken away from us, supplanted by middlemen, and then projected out to this personified cartoon version of God, which is the huge disservice that organized religion did to, in no matter what spiritual practice you're talking about, which is a big debate we can get into also. But while I don't begrudge anyone their faith, I always encourage everyone to question the organized religion and its dogma. And the transition from what the founding teacher taught and what the interpretation is today. To the best of my understanding, in my personal opinion, those like Yeshua that spoke and taught and practiced spirituality, which then became, over time and through some corruption, organized religion, they taught us spiritual tools. And those tools were taken away from us by the implementation of dogma and articles of faith instead of a living practice. Like I said, I don't pretend to be an expert. I'm not going to try to sell you my healing practice. The only thing I'm ever going to try to sell you is merch to support my brand. And if you're curious about that, visit solo.do/Mr. Zeppo. What I am going to suggest to you, dear audience, and to anyone that you share this with, is that healing is our organic birthright. And that the spiritual teachings we were taught in long ago days by various individuals, many of which were lost to history, in my opinion, and we've only got sort of this collection of greatest hits from the most popular that survived the erosion of time. But if you take a broad enough look and you take out the politics and you sift through, the corruptive influences of dogmatic thinking that encroached through individuals choosing to interpret the teachings and strip away the practices over time, they taught us how to achieve that which they were embodying. So because I'm the Christ story is the one I'm most particularly familiar with, despite having a lifelong interest in trying to figure out the phenomena of organized religion, generally speaking. I'll just stick to that, right? But arguably, Yeshua was teaching us things we knew before, but that over time we allowed ourselves to forget and to neglect. There's a lot about the story of Christ that we could debate and argue, and there's many schools of thought, there's many camps of this is the truth and that is the truth, etc. But what I find fascinating and what I encourage others to look into is when anyone addressing the teachings of Christ focuses on the practical, the pragmatic, the meaningful ways in which we can embody Christ consciousness. If Christ was trying to remind us that we were all healers, that we all are embodiments of the divine with severe amnesia, it seems clear to me that we need to acknowledge how that tool set was sleight of hand, tricked, disappeared from us. It like magicians, those who influenced how those teachings were understood over time vanished away the practical and pragmatic, even though it's kind of sitting there in plain sight, And it is our calling, regardless of organized religion, regardless of what faith we were brought up in, I think it is our calling to see through those obstacles that we ourselves, our fellow brothers and sisters in previous eras put in our own way, and reclaim the meaningful, practical, pragmatic, spiritual practices. There's two memes I'm reminded of right now, and it's funny how we've turned memes into a meme itself, if that makes sense. Memes existed before the internet, by the way, in terms of what the word meant before we turned it into a pictogram of a nugget of something with taciturn humor. But the two memes I'm thinking of, I just forgot one of them. But there's one that I really adore because it's moving and really blunt. But it's a picture of like disheveled, sad, depressed Jesus, and it reads something to the effect of, when you taught them how to reconnect to the divine within, and instead they started worshiping you. And he's just like looking miserable, like, ugh. And the other one is a Buddha quote, an attributed Buddha quote, which I don't have in front of me, so I'm going to paraphrase very badly, which says something along the lines of, I did not invent these teachings. I rediscovered an ancient path that has been trodden by many a Buddha long before me. I want to connect those back to the statement, everything I can do, you can do also. Now, I'm not going to hold my breath to see when I'm going to start walking on water. But I do remember this amazing meme, and it's a picture out of one of those illustrated Bibles, like modern illustrated Bibles. And Jesus is walking on water, and one of the disciples has like fallen out of the fishing boat and is like, help me, I can't swim. Why fishermen couldn't swim back in the day, I don't understand, but he's got that look of like, help me, he's got reaching up. And I don't know what the image was originally intended to convey, or what parable it's associated with. I'm sure there's one about Jesus, there's several instances, and I just don't have the passages in my head, but this was being reused for the following statement. And he named, if I remember correctly, he says somebody like Peter or somebody, but, and I'm paraphrasing again because I don't have it in front of me. But Jesus says something to the effect of, if you move all of your chakras down to your feet and flatten them out, you can walk on water. But I digress. There's work to be done. And there's all these traditions that can be helpful. But as anyone knows, people are finicky. As most people realize, people are choosy and persnickety and weird, right? And you can't get everyone in the world to love the same movie. You're never going to get everyone in the world to do yoga. You're never going to get everyone in the world to meditate this one specific technique. And it's not about conformity, right? I forget where the following statement comes from. It's some wisdom teaching, but there are as many paths as there are individuals. The calling is to do the work that we find to do deep within. And I'm the first to admit that that's frightening. That's a horrifying proposition. Imagine you're sitting around your coffee shop or your favorite bar or whatever, and you strike up conversation with some friendly individual, and they turn to you and say, right now, you have to confront all your darkest secrets and deal with them. That conversation would end pretty quick unless you're really open-minded, or you're that kind of drinker that you'd be like, yeah, man, let's go. Let's talk about it. But, you know, confronted by, not to make this about drinking, confronted by that sort of proposition out of the blue, it's almost laughable, right? And I get it. And in our society, in this postmodern society that's literally tearing up the living womb. Sometimes I like to say uterus because it's slightly more graphic, right? Like this planet is a living uterus and it's trying to give birth to life. And being here alive is us being in the womb. And we've created a human world. We've created a society where, like, every day, everything we do, everything we touch is a little bit of our divine mother's flesh and bone chewed up and turned into an object for profit. Right? It's mind-boggling, but everything between you and me, the device I'm talking to, the technology involved in transmitting it to you, and the devices you're using to listen to it. Now, arguably, that's the only way to make things. I get it, right? If you want to build a boat, you got to chop down a tree. But we're doing it in such a grotesque way, and it's something we're already obviously struggling to come to terms with, right? This commodification of everything is toxic and unsustainable. The rat race is toxic and unsustainable. And all of these things, all of this cultural accoutrement, these ideological constructs and these practical economic systems, and I use practical in sort of like the theater sense, in that like it's a thing that functions, not, you know, the more vague term. It does not leave room. Like none of this, the way we've created our culture, our society, our economics, our worldviews, and our tangible systems of sustaining what we've built, they're unsustainable. And here's why healing is important, right? We can look at all the reasons why we're being told that it isn't, or that it's imaginary, or that the only people that can heal us are doctors, or that the only people that can heal us are magical healers, or that the only people that can heal us, the only person that can heal us is this particular personified divine entity. But why is it important? And why is so much effort been spent in distracting us with carrots and sticks from this capacity, from the calling, from the desperate need that we're all enduring to heal? Not to be healed, to heal. Let's talk about that on the flip side of a little bit of Discotheque Synthetica. I'm bringing you a fresh new track that I haven't even dropped on SoundCloud yet. So here's for a little Sprecher exclusive audio release. This track will be up on SoundCloud in the not too distant future for your enjoyment without all of my ramblings in and around and through it. Please enjoy Grunge Metal Mechanic, DJ Zed, and myself from Master Droid's album, an electro metal remix live audio asset entertainment track. That's some rockin' jams right there, DJ Zed. Just going to tease you guys with half of it. Be sure to check out soundcloud.com/Mr. Zeppo to hear the whole track when it drops. It will drop in the not too distant future. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow. Tongue-tied there. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow, depending on how the rest of my afternoon goes. Why is healing important? Why? Okay, before we even tackle that, although it's all very interrelated, why, generally speaking, and I understand that there are obvious exceptions, that there are people out there, not unlike myself, advocating for the much needed action, the call to action, and speaking about it and sharing their experiences. But we still, if you zoom out broad enough, it's clear that generally speaking, we collectively minimize healing. We collectively dismiss it. It is like, why is it so often perceived as weakness? We can do a whole nother episode about like perceived weakness. Why are these things perceived as weakness? Vulnerability, compassion, being in need of healing. That's a whole, we can just jump into it. We could spend hours. Why do we believe that we are, and I think it's a mistake, why are we mistakenly under this belief that we are incapable? I ask those questions because that's the worst word to use right now. I am concerned that these things happen, these weird distractionary things, these things that prevent us from even trying, these things that cajole us into laughing at the hippie new age weirdos and their crystals, right? I've been that person, even though I've also been a hippie new age weirdo with a bunch of crystals. It's part of ego's defense mechanism. It's trying its best to retain what power it has in us as individuals and upon the collective, the entire species. If you haven't heard it yet, in a recent episode, I went on a sidebar about what makes evil people evil. I spoke about it from a clinical categorizational place. What prompts us? I really should have phrased it this way. What prompts us to designate others as evil? And it's ironic, in my opinion. My observation is that we do this when an individual or a group or a corporation or whatever behave immorally. But what does it mean to behave immorally? It means to do things that benefit oneself at the detriment of others. And taken to extremes, that's violent. And I was discussing that in the context of turning it around, because I see so many of us that presumably are not evil, do not belong in that bucket of, ooh, you're one of the evil people, right? That are fomenting and stirring up their own animosity towards those that have been designated as evil, and are falling into the ego trap of objectifying and dehumanizing them. It's happened so many times over the last, I don't know how many years, but almost for as long as I've been on Facebook, And I started, opening up and discussing spiritual matters. But, it's one of those things, I've said it before and I'll say it again because it deserves the repetition for the tangible, meaningful, impact that can bring about. And that's this. If we objectify and dehumanize others because they are objectifying and dehumanizing others, we are reducing ourselves to the status that we have designated to them. If we murder a murderer, how can we pretend we are now not murderers? For all the peculiar anthropological reasons that humanity evolved through long, painful, grotesque periods where sustained violence was pretty much the norm, tribalistic fighting over territory and resources, etc. It goes back that far that we prioritize victory and gain and winning over almost everything else. And from that, as ego loves to feed on victory and winning and more, it's ego's kind of captivated us with all of the quote unquote tools of aggression, conflict, and violence, so that we consciously and unconsciously tend to prefer confrontational tactics, and we ever so rarely turn towards healing tactics. Obviously, all the exceptions are acknowledged and honored here. I'm not trying to accuse anyone of anything they haven't done, but I am asking because, like I said before too, there is no one so enlightened that they can not give a fuck about the work that needs to be done. There's no one so healed in this world that they do not need to heal themselves anymore. At least I don't believe so. I could be wrong. There's plenty of really well-adjusted people. I'm not denying that. But one thing is being well-adjusted, and another thing entirely is being deeply, profoundly healed. Why is healing important? Here's the reason that has the most traction for me. If we don't heal this deep-seated, ancient spiritual trauma that is arguably the true root cause of all quote-unquote evil in the world, we will just keep perpetuating the same toxic bullshit, and we'll keep repackaging it. And yes, there'll be incremental progress, and yes, there'll be some great things to be thankful for, and yes, there'll be some victories and some progress in the quote-unquote right direction. But I think looking back over the last 5, 10, 15, 20, some odd thousand years, it's clear that we have yet to truly and deeply hunker down and confront the slimy, dark grossness that is the spiritual healing that impacts us all, even if we don't notice it. And thus we keep kind of figuratively or metaphorically bashing our heads against the same brick wall. We keep fighting revolutions and then being shocked when tyrannies arise. If we don't, someone posted this a meme that is resonating here, and you know why I never have them up and ready to read clearly? It's because my memory doesn't fish them out of the memory bank until something I'm saying kind of triggers that. Now I forgot what the meme was. Something, if we do not love ourselves, and some people will dismiss this as a cliche trope because it's been around, but it's really easy to diminish almost all sage wisdom into cliche tropes, especially if you've seen it in a meme too many times. But if we cannot love ourselves, if we refuse to love ourselves, we won't ever really truly love anyone else. Right? We'll keep searching for love and failing at it. Now, that doesn't mean you're unworthy. That doesn't mean someone can't come along and help you by loving you. Humanity has this peculiar mental habit of teeter-tottering back and forth between sort of juxtaposing concepts and then saying, oh, well, I'm over here on this side now, so the other side can't be possible. But going back to the other side and then turning it around. Multiple things can be true at once, friends. So whenever something's trying to be reductionist in that way and telling you everything else must be bogus because this one thing is true, put a pause in that right there and like question it deeply and verify for yourself whether or not those things that seem to be mutually exclusive can't also coexist. The catch-22, in my opinion, about our spiritual existence here is that it is a profoundly individuated phenomena. But that does not mean we are not a collective. Your experience, whatever your lived experience is, it is profoundly unique to your life, to your lived experience, to your set of circumstances, to the phenomena around you, right? But that does not mean you are not intimately interconnected and intra-connected with the human species. That's why I'm not daunted. Many are, and I'm not judging. I'm just saying I get it. I get why it's daunting, but I also get why we don't need to be daunted by it. It can seem impossible. How can we heal the whole world? How can we heal people who do not want to be healed? How can we heal people while they're actively being raging assholes? How can we heal people while they're being butchering, murderous warmongers, right? The Zen answer always is by turning inwards, deep within, and attending to the spiritual needs of that which you discover there. It's always been there. Everyone on this planet is a vessel for that which we call divinity. Clearly, not everyone on this planet has a deep, personal, phenomenological understanding of that. And lacking that understanding, without that realization, it's tragically and kind of ridiculously wicked easy to fall into any of the many ego traps out there that are designed to seduce us towards conflict. Conflict of any kind, at any level, of any scale, is engrossing. It's captivating. You may not necessarily want to describe it that way if you're caught up in the middle of it yourself. But we all know what it's like to watch a train wreck of a situation and just be like, wow, I don't know what to do, but I can't not look. And we're all familiar enough with the world's peculiar habit, the world of media and the way we communicate, to sort of hyperfixate on a new and exciting conflict. We're all living through that right now. And you know, the overly the overly jaded and sarcastic are just mocking everybody about it. And there's some value to that. We should not allow ourselves as individuals or a collective to be led by the nose by any institution or, organization or human corporate activity. But there's also something very valid about consciously becoming aware of other people's sufferings and caring and like giving a shit. What if I told you that the system of oppression wants to seduce people into not giving a shit because it improves their bottom line? Tragically, conflict is profitable in direct and sometimes elusive and indirect ways. And tragically, profit drives almost everything about this society that we've built. And it's clear that most of the world either wants or would welcome, those are slightly different attitudes, change for the better. Very few people love war. Those people are out there. Very few people admire conflict. Very few people, but they're out there, right? And we can't force them to change. But we can attend to the individual and collective healing of the human soul. Now, trust me, I'm well aware that for many people, this is an immediate, knee-jerk, laughable idea. People will just laugh in your face. And then mock and ridicule the very notion. Those people need healing. And they don't want to confront that. Forgive me if I'm being redundant, but and I don't remember where this comes from, but I agree with it. The greatest thing any of us can do as individuals is attend to our personal traumas. The intellectual and emotional traumas are usually the most obvious and the first that we tackle. And those are the ones that culture and society tends to fixate on for better or worse, for good reasons or bad reasons. And while plenty of religion pays lip service to healing, as we've already acknowledged, there's some problematic issues there, and they aren't empowering us as individuals to take healing into our own hands. But I can assure you from personal experience that it is possible. It is really difficult to describe because as with many things Zen, or many things spiritual, or many things transcendental, language fails. It can only point us in the right direction in terms of attempting to describe the what and the how. But the why is something we can wrap our brains around. Because we need it. Why must we heal? Why should I heal myself? Why should I invest? Why should I do the effort? Why should I learn ways by which I can experience my inner trauma and attend to it? Because you need that nurturing. Because everyone needs that nurturing. and we need our cup to be, more than half full so we can facilitate others. Here's a statement from the cork board. It's been a pin up on the board for ages. If we can heal ourselves, then we will be able to facilitate each other in that healing. When we can help each other heal, we will be able to heal the entire human species. I get it. That sounds kind of cuckoo crazy. And I also totally acknowledge I could be wrong. And I'm not a betting man, but if I were, let me tell you, I would be putting my money on healing, on forgiveness, on all things about transcendence and enlightenment, as opposed to any of the other standard, toxic, ineffective strategeries that we are sold, that we sell back to ourselves as indoctrinated members of this society. Now, indoctrination is a touchy word, touchy subject, but let me tell you this. No one escaped indoctrination. Look around. It's everywhere. And as Confucius says, I've quoted this a little bit too often probably, but I'll paraphrase it terribly. Humanity needs a light touch of indoctrination or conditioning in order to have a well-balanced, functioning society. But that society then needs the individual to liberate themselves from that indoctrination in order to have a healthy, well-balanced humanity. I think every time I try to quote that, I totally spin out of control with how I'm paraphrasing it and turn it into my own quote, or turn it into a derivative statement. I'm not judging myself. I'm just acknowledging that I'm not doing a very good job of quoting the statement. But I think I'm conveying the idea. And honestly, friends, if we don't make that effort, we will be doomed to repeat our history. This is true and at your individual level as a person and at our collective level as a human species. That's why I bash on about healing. Anybody who follows me on social media platforms know that I comment about that constantly in comment threads. I jump into a discussion and I see that, one of various common problems or world issues are being discussed, and the laying of blame is flying everywhere, or a deep discussion about the causality of the problem is happening, but rarely do I see the discussion of how we can attend to the root cause and heal it. It's easy to say the problem is X, Y, and Z, or those people over there are evil. But evil is a bogeyman. I'm not really sure how to pronounce that word. A boogeyman? A boogerman? That's how, we would have said it as kids. We've objectified and personified and made into a cartoon character. And I know that those are kind of slightly opposing things, but you can objectify a thing and then personify it, or you can personify a thing and then objectify it. And we've turned evil into this externalized, vicious being. But in my opinion, from my perspective, evil is the symptomology, the behavioral and psychological symptomology of long neglected spiritual trauma. And you're not going to address that issue with more violence. You're never going to we're not going to end wars by fighting. Sorry for that abrupt, clunky teacup noise. We're never going to fix the problems we created with the tools we used to build them. And throughout history, there is this through line of individuals that stood up to the gestalt of their era, that stood up and spoke to the problems of their times, that stood up and spoke to the injustices of the world as they saw it, and spoke of healing, tried to teach us how to heal, and we usually kill them or ostracize them, or, we don't treat them very well. And then, in a sort of ultimate slap to the face, throwing salt in the wound, we misconstrue their teachings and drown the baby in the bathwater. The baby being the practical teachings that empower us to reconnect with our divine consciousness, with our divine root source. If spiritual trauma is the cause of our corruption behaviorally and intellectually, one might argue that the root cause of that trauma is some long forgotten divorce from our own divinity, some long forgotten experience or conversion that we impose on ourselves, some long forgotten misdirection. And it's intimidating and challenging to even broach the subject. I've spent almost 45 minutes sort of just staring at the screen going, what am I actually going to say? I don't even know. Because I'm not sitting here saying all this so that you can then buy my healing essential oils or my healing this and that, or I don't completely object to that, but I'm not participating in that. That's not what I'm about. What I am hoping you take away from this is that the only way for you to find out is to go and explore yourself, to investigate meditation techniques. And they can come from any source. There's Christian meditation. There's plenty of forms and styles and schools of thought on how to meditate. And meditation exists and has existed in almost all religious faiths. You just kind of got to dig around and find it. And meditation can be many, many things. One of the most daunting or challenging or intimidating aspects of meditation is this slightly misconstrued notion that we have to control our mind. Now, that's the very first level of the healing, friends. Lots of people have expressed to me in many different conversations that they cannot meditate. And they're usually saying this because they've expressed some concern about something they want to improve, get better about, deal with, heal. And I usually jump right in with my recommendation that on top of all the other great advice that you might be getting, investigating meditation should be there at the center of all that. And people say, well, I can't meditate. I can't control my mind. I can't shut it off. I can't sit and be silent comfortably. And I think their frustration, the stress around that, is caused by the idea that what they're supposed to do is control those thoughts, control those distractions, control, they're coming at it from a place of control. And what those thoughts are, what those racing, distraction, fear-based things that interrupt any, early attempt to engage in meditation. And by early, I mean I've been meditating for years, and I still contend with this. I don't mean to misspeak. But I bashed my head against that wall, that particular wall of like, what do I do with my brain? It doesn't want to meditate. I want to meditate, whatever that means, and my brain doesn't, whatever that means. And I'm at loggerheads. I'm literally in conflict with myself, sitting there trying to shut my mind up. And I wish I was saying it all more eloquently, but I think that my point I'm trying to drive at is, as far as this particular idea is, that's where the healing must start. Don't try to control your brain. Don't try to control your thoughts. Don't punish yourself for being distracted, for being stressed out, for being anxious. Heal yourself. But how? By healing those thoughts. By addressing those issues, those problems in your mind with the attitude of forgiveness and healing, as if they were your own little toddler mind child in your head, right? The voice in your head that doesn't let you meditate, the anxiety in your body that doesn't let you relax, insert the thing that torments you. And instead of trying to control it, instead of trying to defeat it, instead of trying to overcome it, instead of trying to outlast it, heal it. And this is going to come off as cheesy and hokey, I know. But out of all the different approaches that I've encountered, the simplest one to begin with is this visualization. Like, imagine that you're sitting down to meditate. And as soon as you close your eyes, this thought, this image, this anxiety, whatever it is, blocks you from feeling like you're achieving anything, right? Gets in your head and it's aggravating you. Turn to it. Turn inside and visualize it. Visualize it as an aggravating puppy dog or an irate, tantrum-throwing toddler. But it's you. And visualize that part of you that doesn't feel like it is that thing as visualize yourself as the benevolent Zen healer. And express your acknowledgement to that thought, to that anxiety, to that pain, to that sorrow, to that anger, to that outrage, whatever it is that's interrupting your attempt to meditate. Address it, acknowledge it, give it an imaginary hug, pat it on its head, tell it that you love it, tell it that you forgive it, and ask it to stop. Some would say that that's wishful thinking or magical thinking, but I can assure you from personal experience that that is one of the hardest things in the world to do. And when you do it, things happen. Subtle, simple, tiny things. And they don't happen when you want them to. They don't happen when you expect them to. They happen when they're ready to, when you are ready to, when you've taken your self-care to that depth beyond the surface, when you've truly confronted that pain, that anger, that sorrow, that sin, whatever the label is that you're working with, and acknowledged it and forgiven it. A lot of people recoil from this because they adamantly refuse to acknowledge that there is anything they need forgiveness for. And I'm convinced that this is because we externalized divinity. We cast it out and throw it out in that mysterious place over there and made it a big giant cartoon character and gave it all the power and said that only that guy or that person over there can forgive me, or only one of their intermediaries here on earth can forgive me. And there's this stigma. To forgive someone else automatically means in people's minds that someone else did something horrible. So to forgive yourself must mean, if you're sticking to that logic, that you've done something horrible. Now, of course, if you've done something horrible, who wants to confront that? No one does. And that's where the work is. But even if you're not a horrible person that's running around breaking laws and violating people's safety, there's still, because that's where we take it, right? That's what I mean when I say, oh, you've done something horrible. If you need forgiveness, you've done something horrible. But forgiveness is not limited to that. Forgiveness is deeper and more profound than that. Put a pin on the board. We've talked about that. I've referenced like the analogy of like snow. In English, there's one word for snow. Well, maybe two. It's like hail. But we think of those things as two different things. It's all frozen water. And the Inuits, the Eskimos, and other indigenous people have multiple words for these natural phenomena. Like, right? You know, in tropical zones, the indigenous people have many, many words for rain. We've got like two. Rain and sprinkling and storms. I propose to you, dear friends, that likewise, we've tried to reduce a very broad spectrum range of phenomena and call it one thing and make it mean one thing. And that's transactional. That's become transactional. Forgive me, I'm running out of steam and vocal cords. But thank you for tuning in and listening to me ramble about healing. And I hope that if it made sense, it has inspired you to try more, to go further. I'm speaking, today's episode I was thinking about hopefully addressing, if there's one person out there that hears this episode and finally feels like they don't need an external authority to give them permission to heal and to forgive themselves and to begin that work, then it was worth confronting my own horror of not knowing what to say today, and getting on the air and saying it. There's so much more that we could talk about, but like I said, I'm running out of steam, and I want to make sure I don't blow out my voice. So, thank you, namaste, and I, as always, whether I call it out or not in a particular episode, I send you my love and energy. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. Please find us, it's just me. Find me on social media and join the conversation. You can track me down by heading over to solo.to/Mr. Zeppo. It's one of those like link pages. And you can find my entry points on various social media platforms. And I often rotate what's on there. So, feel free to come on back and check it out if you've already been, there a month or two ago, etc. And I hope that if you're struggling with something, that you find the motivation, that you find the strength, that you find the willpower. It's in you. And that you seek out this indescribable phenomena that you will intimately come to know if you don't already. And if you already are, on board, thank you for listening and thank you for the support. And I hope that you contribute to your own healing, by doubling down on your efforts. As one wisdom teaching quote says, every bit of spiritual work helps to elevate all of humanity. That's why it's important. That's why we can't just laugh it off and stress it out and walk it off and sort of never really dig deeper than that. That's why, as challenging and as overwhelming and as difficult and as frightening as it is, we can and we should all unite in supporting one another in that. And there's a lot of obstacles there to try and do that. I know. We'll talk about that on a future episode. Until next time, friends, thank you so much. And for shits and giggles, I'm going to play out this episode with the back half of that same song just to make it interesting. Until next time, friends, may peace, love, and grooviness blossom in your heart. The Almost Daily ZenCast is a production of CTAG Studios, an imaginary production company that exists only in my mind. All thoughts, opinions, theoretical statements, anecdotes, and musings are entirely my own unless otherwise indicated. If you appreciate this show and the content that I strive to deliver on the interwebs, please do swing on by to solo.to/Mr. Zeppo and click on the first link to support the fundraiser, trying to expand the capacities at my disposal. And if you can't, don't stress, don't feel bad. Just tuning in and listening and telling your friends about it is a huge help. Until next time, friends,